Hi everyone, Jenna Rufo here with episode 3 of the empowerED chat. Today I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Taryn Sabia, as well as her mother, Cheryl Prentice. Taryn and Cheryl are going to share with us today what Taryn's journey was like growing up as a student with a visual impairment in the public school system. Today, Taryn Sabia is a research associate professor and director of the Florida Center for Community and Research at the University of South Florida's School of Architecture and Community Design. Since 2014, Taryn has overseen faculty, researchers, and graduate students to deliver the center's mission to create more livable and sustainable communities. Taryn has advised over 30 mayors on sustainable development. She has worked with elected bodies both nationally and globally and has served on several national advisory committees. Taryn's mother, Cheryl Prentice, was a fierce advocate for Taryn's inclusion in public education during a time when many of the laws and protections available today were not in place. In addition to Cheryl's advocacy for her daughter, she had a long and distinguished career in the nursing field. Okay, so I am very happy to have here with me today Taryn Sabia and her mother, Cheryl Prentice. So Taryn and I are good friends. We actually met almost 20 years ago, back when we were both graduate students at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I have to tell the story how we met Taryn. I don't know if you remember, but I think it's pretty funny. So I was sitting in the front row of a lecture hall and, all by myself, kind of sitting there in the front. And Taryn walks in and she comes and sits down next to me. So I said to her, "I'm a nerd. That's why I always sit in the front." And she said, "I'm blind. That's why I always sit in the front." So she wanted to make it very clear to me that she was not a nerd. So so Taryn, the reason I wanted to have you on is because, as we've gotten to know each other over the years, I've heard bits and pieces of your story going through the educational system with a visual impairment. And you have always spoken of your mom as a fierce advocate for you and for inclusion. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the things that our students are still going through today are probably the things that you faced many years ago. So I just thought I would open it up by letting one or both of you share how your journey started with the public school system and then some of the lessons that you've learned along the way.
Sure. So thanks, Jenna. We really appreciate the interview and are excited to be here with you. And hard to believe it's been 20 years already.
Yep.
And I would definitely self-identify as a nerd undercover. And I think that the class that we met in, talking about students with disabilities and actually being in a class titled Students with Disabilities, was something that actually made me feel like I could come out and say that without feeling like I was in a situation where there was going to be a preconceived idea of what my ability was. Mm-hmm. So, that was really one of the first experiences that I had in terms of feeling like there wasn't that preconceived idea about what I was capable of doing. So that was, for me, having an impairment was something that I think was really both empowering and enlightening in terms of, how I progressed after that point, which was already when I had already hit graduate school. Right. So, I'll let my mom begin in terms of our educational beginnings.
Well, the education part probably started when Taryn was 3, when the vision teacher started coming to the house, and she taught us many, many things. She was a miracle worker. She was a wonderful lady, and she followed Taryn through the school system up until I think middle school.
But I should say though that she was firm. She was tough, right? She was not like I didn't get away with anything, right? There was no excuses, and my vision was no excuse for me not doing something. Like she was going to make sure I was going to do it.
I love how you talked about that she had high expectations for you, because sometimes, there's a paternalistic approach, which maybe is not, it comes from a good place. I want to help this person. I want to make sure they're okay. But if we don't hold those expectations high, then we're really disabling students further. So it's about those high expectations with support.
Taryn was already enrolled in a regular preschool, and there were no special anything for children then, and actually for a long, long time. And Miss Schiffer would actually go to this preschool, and she always included the other children with Taryn when she was in the classroom, and they cared because somebody was teaching them there was nothing to be afraid of. And that followed her through into kindergarten and into the first grade and all of elementary school. I do have to say that there were teachers that were extremely reluctant. I don't know if they were afraid, if they thought Taryn was different, or I'm not really sure what it was. But Miss Schiffer was on top of it all the time, would always take care of the problem and tell me about it later. And say, you don't have to worry, I'm taking care of it.
So it sounds like you were very fortunate to have that. But then as you progress through school, perhaps some of those experiences changed a little bit. So maybe you could tell us some of the challenges that you had. And then you had mentioned there was a lot of preconceived notions about what people thought your disability meant. So if you could share that with us, and then Cheryl, anything that you want to add as well.
When I entered high school, everything became a bit different, right? You have a number of teachers. It's not just, one teacher or even maybe a pod of 4. Now all of a sudden I had 8 teachers, right, for different courses or things throughout the day. I had an experience with a newer teacher that was not a positive experience. And it was my 9th grade biology class. And, obviously this is a long time ago, but I could still remember it very clearly. And there were things that she didn't want to do. So one of the things that was difficult for me is that I could not read like overhead projectors. So they were used a lot. And I also couldn't read like ditto copies, right? Remember those like fuzzy, purpley blue copies of things. And so
I think we're dating ourselves here with the dittos and the overhead.
Right. So this was a common practice, though, that teachers took part in. It was part of their lesson planning, and it was part of the things that they did at that time. And so the accommodations that I would get would be that I needed the hardline copy, right? Not that ditto. I needed copies of what was going to be on the overhead, preferably before, but if it was something where they were writing it as we were going, then to provide those to me after so that I could at least take notes from them. These are things that she did not want to do at all. Like these were just things that she just absolutely refused to do, and would make comments during the class in front of them about things I needed. And they were really embarrassing. So I actually got up and walked out of her class on a number of occasions.
I think sometimes when we're working with students with disabilities, some of the practices that educators do, either knowingly or unknowingly, can create a behavior problem. So, your behavior of getting up and leaving, that was really your coping mechanism for not being treated as you should have been treated. But sometimes when we either remove a student to a separate environment or engage in practices that we even think might be helping them, you're going to go down the hall to get some extra support, that can create a stigma, and then students start acting out. So I think it's important as educators to really reflect on if a student is maybe behaving in a way that's not desirable, not to automatically assume that there is something that's wrong with the child, but maybe there is something that we as teachers could be doing better, or something that in the environment we could provide to make it more supportive. And I guess, Cheryl, I also wanted to talk to you because I imagine there were many conversations behind the scenes, perhaps not just with this teacher, but with other teachers, principals, So what advice would you have for parents who are looking to have their children included and maybe are meeting with roadblocks or some of the attitudinal barriers that you experienced, like with the biology teacher?
You have to, as a parent, keep speaking up. I never went in and started yelling because I felt like if I did, I wouldn't be heard. I always tried to sit back and think about how do I get my message across? This doesn't make any sense. And you just have to be persistent.
Right.
It's unacceptable for this to happen. And I felt that it was so unacceptable that I really would have gone to the teacher and sat there, and I would have stayed in that classroom. And so the school nurse went to the principal and said, she'll do it. She's so upset, and I know Cheryl, and she doesn't usually. So I was at you get to a breaking point because it made absolutely no sense.
I just remember the conversation for the next open house night that we had, where you had called the principal beforehand and said, have you talked to her yet? Is this getting better? Because this time I'm going to introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Taryn's mom and I hate your guts.
And you know, people wonder sometimes why parents of children with disabilities have this mistrust for the system. And this is exactly why, because you weren't treated the way that you should have been treated or that anyone would expect to be treated.
Yeah. But when you do the IEPs in that, I don't really know how seriously some of the teachers, I'm not really sure, take this. Now, there was wonderful teachers along the way, and there were teachers who could care less. And I know that's in every profession, no matter what you come across, but it's extremely difficult when it's your child. Yeah. When your child is the one losing out and it makes no sense.
I would say that there were probably three key things that, that happened. One was that my mom was there. And she was persistent. Mm-hmm. She also was extremely encouraging to me and encouraged me to speak up, right? That the world wasn't going to do it for me, that I had to make sure I could do it for myself. And that was a really important piece. And I think probably one of the most important pieces. And then the other thing, the third thing is that we found advocates along the way, people who could help in different situations, and we brought them along with us as much as we could.
Taryn, so as you move from K-12 education, where you had your mom, it sounds like while there were some challenging teachers, you had some educators who were really in your corner and really supported you. How did that change, or how did you have to adjust moving from high school to college and then into graduate school in the work world?
Yeah. So going into college, I really had to advocate for myself, right? At that point, I'm a young adult. You don't necessarily have your parents call the school. Not that,
but I would have. And I did sometimes.
And as a university professor now, right, I've certainly gotten calls from parents at different times, right? But I really had to learn how to navigate that world. I picked a university. It was a liberal arts college, actually. It was a bit smaller in scale, and one that I felt like I was going to be able to navigate better, right? So one was finding that fit of a place that I thought would be some place where I could grow, but also be able to get things I needed, because I could build more of those personal relationships. Because again, I had learned early on that those relationships and finding those advocates that I could build relationships with was going to be the thing that would be most helpful to me. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did, right? I picked a liberal arts college that focused its energies on teaching and learning. But it was definitely up to me to make sure that I provided them with the information that they needed to be able to help me. But it was a balance, and that was the hard part for me, right? Because I had learned early on in high school, there's these preconceived ideas in two ways. If I don't say something, there's a preconceived notion, that may be totally off base.
Right.
If I do say something, there's a preconceived notion that my abilities might be less than what they were, right? So I would observe situations, and I would usually wait the first week to 2 weeks of a class so that I could kind of feel things out. And then I would go and have a discussion with the professors, because I wanted that first assignment to go in or something, so that they could see that I could achieve high, and then I have this impairment, and I'm going to let you know when I need things, and this is what it is that I'm going to need.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And Taryn, so when you graduated from college, then you moved into the Arts and Education program at Harvard, and then later Rhode Island School of Design, RISD. So I'm curious to know if, as a person who is blind, going into a visual arts field and then architecture, how you approached that world and that experience, because I imagine there were people who thought, well, there's no way that a blind person can design a building.
Yeah, and quite a few. So, but we talk about inclusive design, right? And what better way than to have somebody who's experienced what it looks like from that side.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at the Arts and Education program at Harvard, I was asked to sit on a special advisory board meeting, and I was one of the graduate students that had been invited. One of the advisory board members actually asked a direct question of me in front of this 20-person advisory committee that, sets the tone for the program, does its fundraising, all those things, and the other students and faculty that were there, and said, I'm just curious, how can somebody who's, legally blind do art? Right. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting this question here, which was, surprising. So my response was, well, for every painting that we look at, if there were 10 of us standing around it, each one of us would give a different description of what it looks like. I said, so I provide one more point of view of what the world looks like. So, and that's really, I think, an important piece, that we all see things differently. And so it's, something that we all need to be aware of, and also accepting of, and find value in that difference. And then, moving into a graduate architecture program, my faculty became really interested and wanted to see how my vision affected my work. They wanted me to put more of it in my work. And I would say this was actually true in undergrad too, as a visual art major, right? They wanted me to use those experiences to define a lot of what I did. And oftentimes I found it really hard to do that, because I spent my entire life up to that point trying to overcome what I had, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to show that I could do things that everyone else could do, and I could do it the way that they could do it for the most part. And so it was, a very different concept to say, hey, I totally see it differently. I am this different, and this is what I'm going to project out to the world.
Right. That difference is a gift. It's not something that you need to try to be something else, but that you're valued and respected for the perspective that you can bring.
And I would say when I got into the professional world, I did not talk about my vision much. I did not want them to know about it, because I had 2 job interviews where I brought it up and it didn't go well, right? That preconceived idea jumped right in there into the interview. And for positions that I was extremely well qualified for, I didn't get them. Wow. And the comments that were made, one of them was in a municipal office. And so, those comments, especially today, you would see lawsuits over them, right? So, there are things like that I learned very early as I made that transition from academic to professional. And so I didn't talk about it. It took me a long time to even start talking about it in my current position, which is in academia. And so what I have found in now, though, is that it is something that I do talk much more about early on with things, and I try to use it as one of those additional experiences that I can give. And working with graduate students, right? One of the things that I've also come to understand is that all students have challenges of some kind. And it might be labeled as a disability and it might not. And so whatever that challenge is, I think that part of my job as a faculty member and their faculty member is to help them through that challenge. And to help them understand how they can self-advocate. Because I may not know the best solution for them, but together we can figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you telling your story and sharing that, because while, you experienced all of these barriers and prejudices, if we don't talk about it, it's never going to improve for anybody else. So thank you for your courage in sharing that. And Cheryl, in the skills that and beliefs that you obviously instilled in Taryn that let her be so successful. So to wrap it up, Cheryl, I'll start with you. I just wanted you to speak to any educators out there who perhaps are tentative or scared or a little reluctant to have a student with a disability in their general education class. What advice you would give to them?
I would say, first of all, listen to the student, get to know and listen to the parents, and you'll have all the information that you need. Be like a detective, if you don't ask and you don't know anything about that child, and there's nothing to fear. They're just we're just people. We're all people in a world trying to get along, trying to get by. I remember when Taryn was dancing, somebody said, fall off the stage. And I said, if she falls off the stage, she'll get back up and say, whoops, and figure out where the end of that stage is, and it'll never happen again. And she's right. It's a seeing world, and you have to go for what you want. There's nothing you can't do. One day she said, I think I might want to be a doctor or a surgeon. I said, well, you're going to have to figure out what the color of blood is. I said, but you know what? You'll figure it out and you'll learn how to do it and get it if that's what you really want. Then she decided blood was too much. But she's an amazing, amazing lady, and I'm blessed to have her. And as a mom, just support your kids as much as you can, and be that parent that she told me she is. If you want something done, you've got to just be there and be there and be there.
Well, thank you. And I am so grateful to both of you for your passion, your dedication to, really just pushing things forward and making sure that, Taryn, you had the educational experience that you did so that you are able to become the person that you are now. Because sometimes I think we miss that really what's happening in the moment for a child can impact where they are going to be years and years and years from now. Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe on my YouTube channel. And if you never want to miss an update, head on over to my website at www.jennarufo.com/contact to get the latest videos, blogs, offerings, resources, and more.